Mormon Mental Health Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on mormonmentalhealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mormon Mental Health. This is Natasha Helfer, and I am very excited to have Jessie Funk with me today. We're going to get into a little bit about who she is and the topic of discussion. But before we do that, I just want to give a shout out to a few things that are happening that I want to just make sure people are aware of. I am running a myriad of new groups through my group practice, Symmetry Solution, for religious trauma, reclaiming female sexual desire, addressing inappropriate sexual addiction diagnoses of men who have then implications for that for their lives, Post-Mormon couples. So anyway, check out my pages either at natashahelfer.com or getmormonhelp.com. We're also running faith transition support groups, both in person and online, depending on whether or not you reside in Utah and whether or not you want to be in person, given COVID stuff. And also we have an upcoming retreat with John and Margie DeLynn. Jessie Funk is going to be involved here coming up in October. And we're really excited to do the first weekend kind of retreat that we've been able to do since COVID hit. So, and it'll be the only retreat we run like this in the year 2021, more than likely. So hopefully you can take advantage of that if you can. There are scholarships available as well if you feel like you can't afford the cost. So please reach out if you need help in that regard as well. Okay, without further ado, Jessie Funk, hello. Welcome to the program.
So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Why don't you spend just a few minutes just introducing yourself? I know you have a background in social work. You also have some other interesting background experiences. So just tell us a little bit about you and where you are at both professionally and maybe kind of also in your Mormon journey.
Yeah, sure. So I just recently left the church just actually a few months ago, officially resigned. And what led me here was a very long exodus out of the belief system of Mormonism, but finally just made a decision. It was not right for me, did not resonate with me just a few months ago. But yeah, I'm a clinical social worker, and I've worked with teenagers for about 18 years, running a nonprofit. And yeah, running workshops, camps, those kinds of things. So now that I'm out of Mormonism, I'm still really passionate about running programs. I love events. I love immersive experiences that can bring people together and facilitate healing. So I decided I would do an ex-Mormon EFY that we experimented with this last summer, and it was so fun. So we're going to do it again next summer. So if you have any teenagers, send them our way. You can find all the information at especiallyfortruth.com. And that's probably a good synopsis, but
yeah. Okay. So you've kind of gone through your own faith transition. You come from a history of immersive experiences, which I can also attest that there's something quite different between reading a self-help book or getting kind of like information from a webinar to really being in a personal space with people who have gone through something similar to what you've gone through, which is why group therapy in general is so successful and effective for all kinds of issues, whether it's mental health disorders or grief or life transitions of some sort. There's divorce support groups, there's cancer support groups, right? There's all kinds of things, and they're super effective because of what you're talking about. So I'd like for you to share a little bit about a recent experience you had, because I heard that you just recently had a post-Mormon support group type weekend retreat. How would you describe what you kind of organized and put together, and how many people came? Just tell us a little bit about the event you just had.
Yeah, for sure. So it definitely was a support group. That was the intention, but it was also just like an extravaganza, just a fun weekend for women. We had 90 women there in Park City, Utah. It was so incredible. Went Friday night to Sunday morning, and it was just so much fun. And we were trying so hard to create a space where women could heal and connect and make real friendships. So we were, exchanging numbers, and a lot of women were really brave. There were quite a few that were honest that they had to lie to someone in order to go. I mean, they really put themselves out on a limb to be brave and vulnerable and put themselves into this space. And it really speaks to how hungry a lot of people are for real community and feeling like we're not alone. So it was a very positive, very healing, very solution focused event, and it was just beautiful. And then we got home, and my dear friend who helped me organize it, she was on the committee, called me in tears, just so distraught. A woman had called her from a blocked number and said that her church leaders had tasked her specifically to go to our event the entire weekend and to gather as much information as possible and to turn some of the women in to their stake presidents. So this woman called my friend and said, I've turned you into your stake president, and I just want to call you to repentance. So that was very problematic for my amazing friend, because her husband was okay. Like, he knew she was going. She didn't have to lie to him, but he wasn't excited about it because he's still trying to figure out where he is with the church. But in the wrong situation, that's the type of thing that could break up a marriage. That's the type of thing that could end a relationship, that could break up a family. So that level of betrayal from a woman betraying 89 of her sisters, it really just hit my heart so hard. And I really thought about it, and I thought, if you were just looking at an organization, you had no preconceived notion of what that organization did, if it was good or not. Like, let's think of a company that you want to work for. If you had no idea what it was about, but you did know a fact that this company would task people to go spy on other people, and if someone was doing something wrong, they would turn them in. Is that a company you'd want to be part of? I wouldn't trust that company. So if we needed a really clear indicator that the church absolutely has very unhealthy, unethical practices, this is pretty good evidence.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, Jessie, I'm so sorry. And I'm sorry for your friend. I mean, this is very upsetting, and I would even say traumatizing.
Yes.
It's interesting on several levels. I mean, so I'll give you a few of my first responses. I've been running these kinds of retreats, both for transitioning members, people who are leaving the church. I've run retreats for people who are wanting to stay in the church, but are, wanting to maybe have a different perspective, like a more nuanced perspective, but are still very devoted to staying in the church. I've also run a ton of retreats for mixed faith marriages, where one person is leaving, but one person isn't, and trying to help their marriage stay intact and their family stay intact. It has come to my attention throughout the years that most of these spaces have been infiltrated in a similar way that you have shared. I've never had a person flat out tell me. So, I've never had proof. It's just more like, secondhand information that comes from pretty good sources. At the same time, not anything that I could call out a name or, say this particular person actually was there and did this. So what really interested me about interviewing you is that you actually had a person who was contacted by the person who was there. And so that's a first count, first person account. I will also say that in all of these retreats, we've always asked, are there people here who, again, weren't necessarily forthcoming to somebody in their system about where they were going this weekend or this evening? And invariably, there's always been a raise of hands. So just talking about that for a minute, anytime there's a transition in a high demand religion, which Mormonism definitely falls under that category, we understand that the social, familial fallout can be excruciatingly difficult. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned, it oftentimes can cause divorce. It can cause people to have cutoffs with family members. It can cause people to lose their jobs, especially if they're in high level communities in this religion where everybody around you is of the same faith. It can have implications for your children. It can have implications for friendships. And so there's a reason why people are confidential about this process, right? So because it comes at a high cost. And if we've learned anything from the gay community, the gay community takes confidentiality so seriously. I mean, it is like a mortal sin to out somebody before they are ready, because they also understand this high cost, of what that means for a person's life and family and friendly relationships. And so it just goes against so many things, right? And also what's so upsetting to me about it is that it's not an event that's happening in the church sphere, right? Like obviously the church has a right to manage their own affairs, right? If they're holding a meeting, they can decide who's at the meeting, what's happening at the meeting. If they want to report something that's happened at the meeting, well, that's their meeting. But to specifically go into a space that isn't theirs to navigate or to have authority over feels incredibly intrusive and abusive, right? So those are words I'm comfortable using. And for those who don't know, it's very clear that the church has a committee. It's called the Strengthening Church Members Committee. And it is a committee where, it goes all the way up to like authorities within the church monitoring publications, monitoring podcasts, monitoring, who's saying what in the media. And, it even kind of hits like BYU, where people are, and again, kind of recruited to spy on their roommates or other fellow students. And this recruitment is happening through bishops and stake presidents, right? So this isn't just people on the fly, like, oh, I think I'm going to do this on my own because I've got, an important calling that people kind of put on themselves. This is something that is actually, it's really kind of like a calling that's given to them.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, that's my response. So what do you have to say about my response to your response?
I totally agree. And it is, I love that you use the word traumatizing, because it absolutely is. It was so violating for my friend. I mean, she was so scared, and she just kept saying over and over again, she's like, this is why I don't trust women. This is why I don't trust the church, because to feel violated, this stuff has happened before to many of us, definitely happened to me. And so she was like, I was trying to be brave. I was trying to be vulnerable. And I thought I could trust these women. So to be violated over and over and over again, all throughout your life, I mean, it is traumatizing. So yeah, this is just a big problem. And I mean, I was thinking, like, my friend and I were joking. She was like, what did she go back with when she went back to whoever, asked her to do this, whoever paid for her ticket to come to our event? Like, what did she say? Oh yeah, we hugged a lot. And we talked about healing, and we did these very therapeutic exercises, and we talked, and I got to hear these women's stories and their experiences of being hurt. What could she have possibly gone back with, right? Like, I mean, she could definitely have said, yeah, they were speaking against the church. She could have said that, because a lot of women needed to share how the church has hurt them. But that's all in how you see it. That's how you frame it. But seriously, everything we did was so positive and healthy, and we wanted to move forward. So it makes me laugh when a very common phrase, people say is, you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. And in my mind, I'm like, well, that can go both ways, it can. So we were trying to do something where we were wanting to move forward and really heal, and now we get sucked back into some of these games that are just so unethical. So
Well, and it goes against the very values of the religion itself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the values of the religion are honesty, and if you're going to be a missionary, to do it publicly and to shout from the rooftops, and not to be sneaky and be a spy. And I also think about how this is harmful to this woman who was asked to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That because she was there, she had to pretend, she had to lie, she had to feign vulnerability with the rest. I mean, I've been to enough of these events that I know that there were tears. I'm sure there were stories shared that were very personal. I'm sure people talked about their marriages or about their relationship with their children. Those are really very, very sacred experiences. And here she is, asking to be pretending, and maybe even shared something of her own to fit into the group.
Yeah.
How does that impact her?
Exactly. How did it
How could the
impact
church,
her?
yeah, how could the
And
church
then
put her in that position?
exactly, like for her to have to feel like she has to do it, but also to feel justified in doing it. Because I imagine she felt a little bit of dissonance. She had to. She would have
Mhm.
had to, because like you said, they were sacred experiences. These women, some of them were sharing stories of abuse from their childhood that they had never told anyone before.
Mhm.
Some of them were sharing that they were in the LGBT community and they had never shared that before. I mean,
Mhm.
these incredibly, that's the perfect word, sacred experiences that these women were so brave to share. And so this woman who was spying, like, she had to have felt some kind of dissonance, but for her to be able to justify it and say, well, it's okay, like, yeah, oh, I don't feel like totally good about this, something had to have felt a little off, but then she would override that, I imagine, by
Mhm.
saying, but I'm being faithful, i'm
Right.
being I'm being a good Mormon, I'm being a missionary,
I'm being
I'm doing.
obedient. I'm playing a role
Yeah.
in Zion, which, I mean, historically, this is where it gets scary, right? Because historically, I think generally good people can do some pretty atrocious things in the
Mm-hmm.
name of God, in the name of religion, even in the name of government, right? When you're loyal to a system over your own conscience, humans can do some pretty atrocious things.
So
Pretty
true.
atrocious things.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you don't hear a lot about atheists, shooting, like, going on a shooting spree. Yeah, a lot of people,
Mhm.
it can get to the point where you're willing to sacrifice your own your own values, like just as a person separate from your religion, you're willing to sacrifice that in order to be faithful.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I'm thinking, I mean, there's two audiences here maybe that I'd like to maybe put our closing, thoughts towards. I mean, obviously there's people who are active and believing and going about their, worship and the ways that they hold true to their religion. Mormonism right now is what we're talking about, the LDS church. So what would we say to them to help educate how this is really probably something you should think very carefully about before you would accept an assignment like this? But then really probably my bigger message is to those who need help, who are isolated, and who after hearing something like this may feel not as safe, or may not take the opportunities that they have to come to one of, like a free support group or a paid retreat, or all these resources that are starting to kind of show up in the transitioning and post-Mormon world. So why don't we start with the believers, even the ecclesiastical leaders? Like, what would we as mental health professionals say to people within the church as far as how this doesn't match with wellness standards?
Yeah, I think for me, I was talking to this sweet friend that did feel so violated, and she's like, I'm scared to plan another one, to help plan another one. She was on our committee, and she's like, I'm scared to go again. And we really talked through that. And she's like, of course I want to. I really want to. I know that this church isn't right for me. And so I said, I completely understand where you are. I 100%. And I have so much empathy for it. And you have to decide if you're safe or not. And you have to decide, is it worth the possible consequences? Because for a lot of people, and I know this personally because this is exactly why I'm divorced now, my marriage ended because of the church. That is the reason, because I left. And so I understand that. Is it a price you're willing to pay if that's a possible consequence? So I understand that. That's so valid, so valid. However, there is a point where you have to decide, am I willing to sacrifice myself, and for how long? Because for a long time I sacrificed myself for the sake of my children, and for me that was the right decision. For a long time, I'd say over a decade. And then I started realizing I will suffocate. I will never be proud of who I was. I need to live in integrity. And so the scale shifted. Was it worth it for a while to sacrifice my identity, my heart, my soul, the oxygen that I was breathing? Was it worth it? For a while it was. So you have to kind of weigh that out. And then at some point, maybe the scale will shift and it might be the right time for you. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that sometimes there's just different seasons in life. And at some point, you can decide that it's right for you to make a decision if you know that this organization, this system is not right for your life. So I want to be sensitive to it. And I also want to encourage people to live their truth, because I've worked with so many LGBT kids who were very suicidal because they truly felt like that was the answer instead of living their truth. And that's heartbreaking. That's obviously no way to live. So yeah, that's what I'd say to someone who is trying to decide. You absolutely can honor your timeline. And then hopefully at some point you can say, I matter. Yeah. I matter too. My integrity matters. And living an authentic life is really important to me. So I want to be honest about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you are touching on that delicate balance when people are afraid to come out per se, whether it's, their sexual orientation or their religious identity and all that. There is this balance between self-protection and self-protection.
Yeah.
Meaning self-protection, like you need things to kind of stay in place in order to kind of survive, versus the self-protection of being more authentic to yourself. And that's a really difficult dilemma. And like you say, for some people that can take decades, that can, you may be willing to lean more towards the system sacrifice versus your own authenticity for a while. So that is a really personal journey. And I always say safety first, right? So whatever keeps you safe is most important first, especially keeping you alive. At the same time, we also know that the research shows that the longer you stay in inauthentic, kind of secret, duplicitous spaces, there are implications for your health. Maybe you're not suicidal, but maybe you'll die 10 years earlier from stress and heart conditions and diabetes and things like that, because all of those things are interrelated. Yes. With a person being able to be kind of true to themselves. So what would you say now from a mental health perspective to bishops, stake presidents, members who are willing to take on these callings? What would you say to them as far as helping educate them as to how this is probably not something that they should agree to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought about that a lot. If I could sit down with whoever tasked this woman with coming to our event, and obviously they had to pay for a ticket to go. So, I mean, it was a well thought out plan. It was actually like a plan was put in place. They had to have met. They had to have said, here's what you need to look for. Here's the game you need to play in order to fit in so that you can win their trust, and then turn around and betray them. I mean, that had to have been explicitly said. I would love to sit down with that man, because we of course know that it would be a man. And I would love to say, if you truly believe what this church is about, like you mentioned, Natasha, with the values that the church teaches, honesty and integrity and love, and there's a lot of very positive things that the church teaches. I would love to say, if you truly believe in those things, is it possible that you would be even more effective as a leader if you practiced empathy over orthodoxy? Mm-hmm. If empathy was the goal, mm-hmm. and you chose that instead of orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And I know someone in that position who obviously was committed enough to send a woman to spy wouldn't be open-minded, I think, to that conversation. But I would love to just ask the question. Mm-hmm. Do you think you'd be a more effective leader? You'd be a more effective disciple of Jesus Christ if you chose empathy over orthodoxy? I'd just love to see what the response is to that, because what this man did is not leadership. And I don't want to be dramatic, and I don't want to, over hype up the violation, but this was a very dear friend of mine, and this was an event I spent a few months putting my heart and soul into. So of course I did take it quite personally. I was very emotional. I made a few TikToks about it. I don't want to be over dramatic, but the example I thought of was the Gestapo.
Mm,
And I thought of like
mhm,
at some point that's where we go,
mhm,
where you're willing to sacrifice human beings. You're willing to sacrifice a human being's integrity and a safe space for a human being
mhm.
in the name of God, in the name of a church.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. So I think it comes down to that question: what would happen if you chose empathy over orthodoxy? Because I don't believe you can have both. I think you
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many principles that actually match between mental health and wellness and kind of the doctrinal understandings of the gospel per se. Like, I mean, how many times in the scriptures do you read, do not fear? This seems like a very fear-based approach. Like, what are they
Mhm.
afraid of?
Yeah.
What do they think is going to happen at this kind of an event? And if their fear is that somebody within the congregation is having doubts and maybe could influence other people to have doubts, which is, I'm guessing, where this whole thing is coming from. I'm guessing that's the fear. That ship has sailed. I mean, there's no amount of post-Mormon retreats or support groups or whatever that will stop that. I mean, doubting is a normal part of human development, first of all.
Mhm.
Second of all, nobody can stop the internet. That ship has sailed. So there's a lot more information available that both the church and members of the church have to reconcile with how they're going to move forward, either in or out of the church. Those things are not going to shift by 80 women attending a retreat or not.
Yeah.
And to your point, empathy and orthodoxy, I think people should just know that fear-based approaches don't generally work. Like, there's
Yeah.
no research to support. I mean, we tried this with like Moms Against Drunk Drivers. We tried this with like Moms Against Drugs, like all these like programs that were set up in the 80s and 90s, very fear-based. I remember having to walk outside and seeing the crashed car that was like this, and well, this happened with drunk driving. And what the research shows is that fear-based approaches work temporarily for a short amount of time, but they
Mhm.
are not sustainable. And because people then have to like get over that fear and kind of calm themselves down, it actually is less effective in the long run because they're having to calm themselves down from that initial scary thing.
Mm.
So if this is the church's plan is to kind of take a fear-based approach, it's only going to work, I think, with the most orthodox of their members. And as we know, just statistically, this is part of the reason why, unfortunately, we're losing a lot of our nuanced progressive Mormons. At least I see that as unfortunate. Some people might see that as that's great. But I think that it's sad when an organization only caters to a certain group. I think the more diverse an organization is, usually the healthier it is. And my other thought is just the classic golden rule. I mean, it's interesting to
Yeah.
me that I wasn't allowed into my own disciplinary procedure because they
Right.
were afraid I was going to record them,
Yes.
even though they didn't have any right to confidentiality. And even though I had no intention to record, but that's what they were worried about. Why would they not want their words or their thoughts open and able for people to, see?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can kind of understand that. I wouldn't want to be recorded in private in any situation, right?
Mhm.
And then have that information be used against me. So if they don't want those things to happen to them, why would they think that it's okay to do that to other people?
Right.
I want to also go back to something that you said about that choice of, getting support for the individual who's maybe struggling. One way that you can do this anonymously is, like, for example, we do have not just Symmetry Solutions, but there's a lot of Zoom support meetings,
Mhm.
and you can go on Zoom and listen in. You can, shut off your video. You can put a different name on the thing. Even in my mixed faith classes, I have had people kind of use different names, even though they're there physically. So there are ways to protect yourself. It's sad that we're having to have this conversation.
I know. I know. Not
I can't believe it.
thought of.
I can't believe we're having this conversation, but there are ways to protect your anonymity.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Facebook groups that will only allow certain people in. And even there, you can create a fake Facebook name. You can kind of interact in a way that wouldn't give people identifying information, but you could still get that support you need. I don't know, any other ideas you have on that front?
I mean, the only other thing I was thinking of was at retreats, we have everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement, which is also so sad that we would even have to think of that. I mean, I knew that there would be risk. Like I knew that a lot of women would have a hard time saying to, their spouses, I'm going to go to this event. I knew that, but I honestly, I guess I was just kind of naive. I did not see this one coming, like to have a spy there. And now we have to think of some ways to protect anonymity so that women can come. They need these spaces. They need connection. They need community. They need to know they're not alone. For literally the majority of my life, I felt like there was something wrong with me. I thought I was a bad human. I shamed myself so hard. And I just thought if I was just more faithful, I would earn a testimony. If I read the scriptures more, I would earn a testimony. It didn't work for me. That didn't work for me. And I thought there was just something wrong with me. So to finally realize that I wasn't alone, because I found some Facebook groups and I did meet other women that felt the same way I did, I don't want to be dramatic, but it saved my life. Saved my life.
I don't think that's dramatic, Jessie.
Yeah.
I don't think that's dramatic.
Yeah. It's such a real feeling where you feel so suffocated, you feel so alone, you feel so isolated that you think suicide is a good option. So we need these spaces. We need them. That's what I'd really like to say to some leaders who, would send someone to betray their sisters. We need these spaces. So that's where empathy over orthodoxy comes in. If you have a woman who is suicidal and she has the option to go to a women's retreat, let her go. Just let her go. Anyway, yeah. So, I mean, that's all I was thinking that's the only thing I can think of because there's no way to screen for it. Yeah. Like there's no way to ask someone if they're there on false pretenses. So just to be able to say, come on, you guys, like let people do what they feel is right for them. If they're going to leave the church, let them go. That's what they need to do. That's right for them.
Yeah. And that's what's so interesting. In my whole career, Jessie, I've always had in mind what I would call the Mormon family, right? The spectrum, right? Which includes the most Orthodox believers, the people who stay dressed in Sunday dress all day Sunday, would never watch the Super Bowl on Sunday, just those kinds of members. And then you've got the more like progressive members who aren't that strict about the rules, but still love the gospel, love the church, serve and do callings. Then you've got the Mormons, the kind of derogatory term Jack Mormons, right? They're out there, they don't really participate, but they still come from, this culture and this family that helped form who they are. And then you've got the people who are leaving and are post and are struggling. And I mean, when we talk about, if Mormonism is going to talk about the body of Christ, if Mormonism is going to claim that part of the baptismal covenants are to mourn with those who mourn and to be of service and to act like Christ, I mean, never in my experience was there spying on Christ, that Christ, there were spying on Christ, but Christ never asked for people to spy on his behalf. It just seems like such an underhanded, sneaky method that has nothing to do with, I think, most people's values, even members of the church.
Yes.
And so that's why you're asking the church members to be duplicitous to their own values. And to your point, I just want to also say that we do know that when people are isolated, mental health symptoms increase, substance abuse risk increases, suicidal risk increases, relational distress increases. So if you're going to stop if you're so afraid that people could leave your congregation or that they could influence your congregation, we have to make space for people to Mormon the ways that they're going to Mormon. If Mormonism works for you, if the LDS Church works for you, if it's a good space for you, by all means participate, if it helps. And then if it isn't, we've got to be graceful and let people have their dignity as they leave, and wish them well on their way. You know, we're so sad that this isn't a good place for you, and we wish you the best. And can we still commune? Right? I mean, that can't be that hard.
Right. Exactly.
I don't think that can be that hard, but obviously it is.
Real agency. Aren't we all about agency? Wasn't that Jesus's plan? Isn't that what the entire gospel is about? Let them have their agency. Let them love who they're going to love. Let them worship the way they're going to worship. Yeah, that's such an important piece. We got to get rid of fear, control, and shame. Yeah.
I always tease us as a Mormon family that we love Satan's plan. We love Satan's parenting plan. Really Father's parenting plan, that's too scary. But Satan's parenting plan, we love it. Control everybody. Everybody's got to do the same thing, and we're all going to get back whether you like it or not. Anyway, perfect. Jessie, I have loved having you on. I'm so sorry that this is how you're coming to my program for this particular reason. It's incredibly distressing. My heart just goes out to you. My heart goes out to all the women who attended this particular event. And I look forward to doing events with you in the future and other events. And oh my goodness, people, let's congregate, right? Whether it's inside, whether it's in between, or whether it's out, congregation is so important. Community is so important. So let's let each other have those communities.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Natasha, I love the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessie. We'll be in touch. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee, Jesus Savior, pilot me, unknown ways before me roll, hiding rock and treacherous shoal, chart and compass came from thee, Jesus Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea, Jesus Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous wave, obey thy will, when thou sayest to them, be still, wondrous sovereign of the sea, Jesus Savior, pilot me. when at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and the peaceful rest, then while leaning on my breast, may I hear thee say to me, fear not,